Hi everybody, I'm Grace LeConte of LeConte Consulting, and this is the second live Facebook Live event that I'm hosting on different topics related to running a business, and especially topics that can be difficult for business owners who feel really connected to their customers or patients. And if you're looking for some ways to find more balance in running a business or in creating structure, then that's what you'll find in these events. So today the topic is creating a company culture, and it's trash day here, so you can hear the trash man coming around. Oh, by the way, just a side note, but I have a lot of respect for people who do things that are not so pleasant, like taking out trash. Ooh, that's really loud. I worked in a long-term care facility, and I actually grew up going to nursing homes and long-term care facilities most of my childhood and adolescence, so visiting elderly relatives. So I got to see a lot of different aspects of how people have to do things that are not so pleasant, cleaning up, dirt and messes and old food. And hi there, welcome. It's not always pleasant to do things that are uncomfortable. Like, there are a lot of things that we do in life that are uncomfortable, but they have to be done for us to be to have the ultimate outcome that we want. So I just have a really deep respect for anybody who does cleaning or service or work directly with people who have needs that require a lot of physical effort. Because it's incredibly helpful for a society to have individuals like that who are willing to do work that the rest of us prefer not to do. So thank you, Mr. or Mrs. Trashman. Alright, so today, company culture. That does tie in with the topic, actually, because one of the things that I've developed in my work with strategic risk topics is, and philosophies, one of my philosophies has to do with foundational staff or foundational employees. And as I mentioned, I've worked in long-term care, I've worked in hospitals and in software companies and with other service groups related to healthcare and medical practices. And one thing that I noticed a lot was that people who did the work at the bottom of the organization, in my opinion, had the best ideas, the best solutions, and really had the most critical work that was required to do what the company needed to succeed. So there were a lot of things that happened at the top, and eventually, I worked my way into management roles, and I was a director, I worked in executive teams, and now I consult with executives. But my work at the bottom of organizations, as a dishwasher, as a secretary, patient care associate, housekeeper. I've done several of these roles myself. I've managed them, and then I moved up to a level where I really didn't have much to do with the day-to-day of people who do these foundational roles. And there's a change in thinking that happens when you get to that top level. It's really hard to understand when you're going through it, but it's obvious to everyone else. So this change in thinking results from making long-term strategic decisions, but forgetting how important those people who really make a difference in the organization, what they're thinking and how they see the world, doesn't seem as relevant once you get to a certain level of leadership. So I observed this, and I got sucked into the world of making big decisions without consulting anyone below our leadership level, and I realized later how foolish that is. It's foolish to not give credit to people who do the work that keeps everybody else going. The glue that holds the organization together is at that bottom level. And I call that foundational staff. There are 4 different aspects. I've written about this in other posts, and you can look it up on my definitions page. I'll share a link in the video once I finish recording this. But foundational staff are really the key to every organization. And as we're transitioning into the topic for today of company culture, I just want to make sure that I explain that culture is a manifestation of what the owners believe. It's the reflection of how the owner or owners of a company see the world. So however, if you're an owner, if you see the world in a certain way and you have certain very strong beliefs and expectations, and if you have a philosophy of how things should be, it's going to reflect in the way that you do business, in your behavior, in the way that you set up your policies and your procedures of how you expect things to happen. It's going to come out in how you celebrate events or experiences, and how you treat people, and how you manage your employees, and in how you relate to your customers. So it's kind of like it's the I guess it's the surroundings, the spirit of how your company works. All of this is reflected from your beliefs internally as the business owner. So I'm going to be talking a bit about company culture, but also reading questions that have been sent to me. So thanks so much if you've contributed a question, or if we've had discussions in the past. I'll be covering some of those in our discussion today. So let's get started. So the first question was, could you explain what company culture is and what it includes? So what is company culture? Alright, so what is a company culture? Well, I've just kind of given a broad overview, but it really is a defined expectation that you have as a business owner. A defined, clear, spelled out expectation. Whether or not you consciously are aware of this or not, it's still something that you set up in a certain way. You have expectations, even if they're not written down. So they're expectations of behavior, how everyone should act. They're expectations of the words that you use or what you don't use. Maybe you choose not to use certain words in your company. It's symbols that may connect with others, or symbols of how you relate to those that you're serving. It's also habits, so the things that you do every single day or every week, and the cycles of your business. It's expectations of values. You wouldn't hire someone to join your company if you didn't have a lot in common with that person in terms of the core beliefs and values. And if you're hiring people that don't have those values, you're going to find out very quickly that they don't really fit your organization. So that's something that is important to define, and also is not important. So it goes both ways, both what you do believe and also what you do not. So that's what company culture is. It is a set of these beliefs, these activities, these behaviors that you truly believe are important for your organization to succeed. And it impacts the organization in a lot of ways. Okay, so work environment can be something that encourages people to speak together and to form teams and to collaborate, or it can be something that separates them and causes dissension and fighting or strong competition. And depending on your personality type and how you believe a work environment should be, you will end up setting up the expectations of how your staff are going to interact with each other, and you'll be rewarding behavior that you believe is helpful, and you'll be maybe even subconsciously penalizing behavior that you don't believe is good. So your company culture is based on your understanding of the world and how you believe people should act. It also comes out in the vision and mission for your organization. So whatever you believe is the ultimate purpose, the future point, and also who you're relating to and how you're doing that, your mission, that is going to reflect your beliefs. And that's going to also impact how your culture feels to others. It also impacts the ethical practices. I know several business owners that are very hard workers and they have strong moral values, but they bend a lot of rules, and it can be bordering on illegal or unethical. And a few times, I've watched this happen, and they were called out, or sometimes they were investigated for fraud. It can happen even to people who are extremely honest. So it's very important as a business owner to determine what that line is that you will not cross. Because when you're tempted and when a situation feels overwhelming, or you're faced with financial stress or other problems, it can be really easy to cross the line into unethical or illegal behavior. If your culture is not clearly defined as being, this is as far as we go, we do not cross that line. No one in our organization is going to do this. That's going to have a huge impact on how your culture exists. If you are extremely goal-oriented and you're very focused on doing everything possible, staying up late, working 80-hour weeks, and driving to get to that goal, then the culture of organization is going to be very, very driven and goal-focused as well. If your ultimate objectives are to build relationships and to flex with the needs of your customers and to be very open, then it's going to be a completely different culture. You're going to serve people with a much more relaxed attitude instead of being so focused on reaching those goals or those targets. So you can see how a culture can be really different depending on your personality. And also the performance standards. So how do you measure whether someone is achieving the objectives of their role in your organization? Do you have rewards for people who reach a certain level, or do you punish people who will go below that level? Whatever it is you do as an owner will be obvious to your staff and to your customers if you set up a certain way of measuring how well they're going to reach those goals. Okay, so second question. Let's try to get through without the internet going down on me again. All right, why is a company culture important? Well, I've thought about this for a while because I was asked this a few months ago. Why would a company culture be important? What's the point of even thinking about it? And I think that there are 7 reasons. There are 7 reasons that it matters. The first one is self-expression. This may or may not speak to you, but the majority of people that I work with and that I consult with are very interested in creatively expressing themselves and showing that creativity to the world in the art of what they do. So a company culture is a manifestation or a way of presenting that creativity to others. It's a live environment. It's a collection of different people and personalities that can meld together and create even more impact on the world than just one person alone. Your company culture can be a melting pot of the personality types of the people that you've hired and also your other stakeholders, the people that want to benefit your company and make it better. I also think that a company culture is important because it helps you to be true to your beliefs. You can stay on track with what you have as core beliefs and values by showcasing those in the way that your company behaves, the way that everyone in your company behaves. And of course, you have the right to accept behavior or to, discipline behavior that does not fit that mold. But whatever it is, that's your decision. You have the ability to shape that based on your belief system. The third reason is that you get to build a community. Having a culture in a company is like a mini community of people who want to be part of something in order to grow it. And so it's an opportunity to make the most of that. Also, it helps you attract the right people. A company culture is an environment that speaks to people's inner needs, fears, and expectations. It should be a place that rewards people who have the same belief and philosophy as you, and it should be fairly uncomfortable or not as interesting to people who don't have the same philosophy as you. So if you set it up the right way, you will attract people either as employees or collaborators or customers / patients who want to be part of this experience with you and see the value of moving it forward. And it's going to make that experience something very magnetic to other people. Also, it helps you develop strong bonds with people. So having a company culture where you feel confident and comfortable expressing yourself and where your behavior matches your own belief system is going to bring people closer to you and help you to connect with them in a deep way. The 6th reason is that it enhances the workplace. It makes it a lot more fun to be in a place where the environment is clearly spelled out and the expectations are very obvious, but it can also bring out a really enjoyable experience for your employees or for anyone else who works with you. And also the final one, the seventh reason, is because it produces better results. When you think through how the culture or the behaviors and beliefs of what is expected in your company, you can't expect beliefs, but you can reward and attract people with certain beliefs. It enhances the outcomes of what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so that was the question, why is a company culture important? All right, the third question that I've been asked is, can you give me some examples of good and bad culture? I've worked in quite a lot of work situations. I think I counted at least 21 different jobs in my life, starting when I was 14, and I sold chairs. It's a long story. I sold foldable chairs. I also worked as a secretary for my dad. I babysat, and then in college I did all sorts of things. You can read more about that in a post I just wrote about multi-level marketing, because certain types of business opportunities seem very attractive when you're desperate for money and you don't have many other options. So there are some companies I worked for that had a great experience in, and which were extremely beneficial to me and helped me to develop and mature. And other experiences were very harmful, and some were even, I would say, abusive, to the point where I was told to do unethical or illegal activities. I was treated extremely badly. I was harassed. And I think almost every woman could say that. It's not unusual to go through experiences that I have been through, which is sad. The Me Too campaign or experience or shared experience that we've just gone through in the last year has made it clear that this is not an unusual thing to go through. So, good and bad culture. A good culture, hi, welcome. Good culture would be, for me, it was a few examples. When I worked for a company and they provided me with a welcome packet, which included a list of, like, a letter to me, welcoming me in the company. It included a mug, and like a drinking mug, and a shirt with the company logo, and a lot of other goodies, and materials for me to review about the policies and the expectations, and also like an invitation to an upcoming event. I just thought that was really personal and special because I'd never had something that meticulous put together. It took a lot of effort on their part, but it meant a lot. Another example of a good company culture was one of my employers provided me with a sheet where I answered questions about how I would like to be appreciated. And they gave different options, check boxes of would I like to receive a gift or be taken out to lunch, or would I like to be praised in public, and this was before the Languages of Appreciation book was popular. I don't even know if it had been written. This was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, but that made a huge impact on me because I answered the questions with what I would prefer, and I think I answered that I'd like to get a gift certificate to Barnes & Noble because my favorite thing to do is buy books and read. The last thing I would want to do is have public recognition or, have to sit with my boss for lunch for 2 hours. That was not the way that I would want to be appreciated, but it helped to give me a sense of independence and to express myself in the initial process of coming into this company. So I thought that was really special. Also, a lunch introduction. Some companies provide an opportunity for a new employee to be featured and introduced formally to the rest of the organization with a special lunch, and maybe have that person feel more comfortable meeting everyone else, where they have very few responsibilities and everyone else kind of has to present themselves. So instead of you having to remember everyone's name, everyone else comes to you, and kind of, it felt like a very close, encouraging experience for me. And then a fourth example was a stand-up. So one organization where I worked had a morning stand-up routine at 8:30. So we would come to work at 8, do some quick emails and checking, and then all come to a central place literally standing in a circle, and there would be an initiation of going around the circle to talk about updates or needs or upcoming issues that needed to be resolved, and we could discuss it in this group setting. But also new employees would be introduced at that point, and greeted, and it was just a really nice experience. And also, so the opportunity to give frequent feedback was also something that I thought was extremely helpful. As a new employee, you have a better perspective of how the organization is working and where some problems might lie, and things that are very easy to overlook if you've been there for years. So there are many benefits that a new employee could bring, and I just thought that was a very nice approach to be asked for feedback without any fear of retaliation, which is an important part of creating a healthy feedback loop, is not creating an environment where you will be punished for bringing up problems. That's so important. So those are examples of good company culture where I've been employed. Bad company culture. Just off the top of my head, I was thinking of a few this morning. When you separate the management team from the staff, and there's a big division between those two groups. I've experienced both, being in a staff role and not being able to talk to upper managers, and also being an upper manager and not connecting or engaging with the staff. And I speak about that in a few posts that I've written about employee for a day experiences, which I started doing at one company because there was so little interaction between those of us at the top level of this organization and the staff below. And upper level leaders would go out to eat almost every day, and the staff would eat together in their lunchroom. There was no interaction whatsoever, so there wasn't any communication happening with problems that were arising. They didn't even have a weekly meeting, so I initiated a weekly meeting for my team, and I also decided to sit with them for lunch so that we could connect more. And I set up several days in a row where I literally sat in the seat with my staff and learned their role and did their job and tried to understand the pain points of what they were going through. It taught me so much. It's one thing to assume what the problems are, it's another to literally have to solve them yourself. It gives you a whole different perspective. So employee for a day is something I recommend to every leader, no matter what your job situation. If you're a solo practitioner, sometimes it actually helps to even reverse your day for a bit and be in a different role just to try it out. Being uncomfortable can really help you see things that you wouldn't otherwise know. So that, being separated was a very dysfunctional aspect of a company where I worked. Not following through on promises. So for example, we had a SWOT analysis that our executive team did together, and I was so excited. Everybody was really excited about the results. We'd all thought of these great strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and there was a big poster board with everything written out. And after our meeting, our CEO sent this out to all of us, the list, and then days went by, weeks went by, and nothing came of it. There was no next step. There was no result from all this exciting discovery of what our organization could do better. And I thought that was just a really missed opportunity, which should have been on the O part, not applying strategic tools. So that was disappointing. It was hard to watch that happen because it was a great potential for what this organization could have done better, and instead they just let it go by. The extreme competition, when you set people up to compete and you don't also give them opportunity to collaborate, it can be divisive. When you don't have an opportunity to when you don't allow people to connect and you just pit them against each other in a competition setting. And this can be in response to your own personality, which may be very competitive. If that's one of your strengths or something that drives you, then you may be creating a culture where that's rewarded, but it can also go too far. And number 4, where do I start with figuring out what my company's culture is? So someone asked me this, and she owned a practice that wasn't too big. She had a couple of employees. But my suggestion would be First, you have to define your belief system and your philosophy. So before you try to analyze your culture and how you have fun together and how you encourage people, it's really important to know what you believe, what you think about the world, because as the owner, you're going to be driving every other decision that happens, even if you're not conscious of it. So what do you believe? How do you see the world? What is your expectation? And then what are your standards? What do you think should happen, and how do you measure growth? Those should be your primary question before you dig into anything else. And next question. What do you see changing in the company culture because of social media? So social media is a mighty strong communication method. In my opinion, it is not the only communication method, and I think there are some problems with how it happens. As we're seeing today, my internet connection is not as strong as I would like it, and because of that, it's causing some delays or frustrations if you're watching. But there are other things that social media can make stronger in developing a company culture, and there's some things that it can do to harm your relationships with your staff or with your customers. So one thing that it can benefit is connecting people globally. It's amazing how many people I've been in touch with that I never would have heard from in Europe and Asia and Africa, people that I've never met but who connect with me because of the topics I talk about, or because of the experiences that we share. And that's a wonderful and powerful thing that was not possible before social media. And we're back again. Hello. So connecting with people globally is a fantastic thing that has changed because of social media. Also, we can show empathy and emotional bonds with people. Like right now, you can tell my enthusiasm, you can kind of experience with me some of the frustrations that I've had in the past with cultures that were harmful, and also my joy at being in cultures that really encouraged me to be myself. And you can feel that because I'm speaking to you as if you're right there. So that's something that social media has brought that is just incredibly powerful. And your company can benefit a lot from that closeness that people feel to you. And the empathy that you show for people's experiences and their pain. That's something that's really hard to do in a setting that doesn't include immediate connection through social media outlets. Viral sharing. I mean, who knows? You could be the next viral video or viral post. You never know. Hopefully it's for something that your company stands for and not something that is a joke or a misunderstanding. There's always that possibility, so it's important to double check your spelling and your grammar, and also make sure that it's not highly offensive to a majority of your ideal customers. That's really, really important. Okay, telling stories is really easy to do with social media, and yet a lot of business owners don't do it very well because they're not familiar with how to tell stories using these methods. So there are a lot of great resources out there about how to do that, how to connect with people based on your own experiences or the experiences of your customers, or just telling a really fun story about what happened, even if it's not you personally. It's the way that our brains are wired. Making a difference. So because millennials and the way that millennials think have such an impact right now on our changing perception of the world, and one of the values of the millennial generation is making an impact on the world and influencing others, it's very helpful to consider using that as one of your cultural behaviors, or the attitude that you have toward your staff or your customers, especially if you serve millennial individuals who are in a millennial generation. And even if you're not, I'm technically millennial, but I really have more in common with Gen X. I'm kind of in that in-between stage in the late 70s, early 80s. And I think that making a difference is something that's lacking a lot in my generation, Gen X and boomers, because maybe we're not used to putting ourselves out there in the world as much. So it's something it can be difficult barrier to get through, but it makes such a difference in connecting with your potential customers. And then social media can be an influence to others. You can benefit others and influence them to use your services or your products by promoting through the use of social media. So those are tons of reasons how you can use your social media methods to connect with people by expressing your company culture. But there are some downsides. One of them is that we tend to have a Facebook perfect look. We can portray something that's not as realistic of a lifestyle or an experience, and if people know us and really know us personally, they realize that our social media presence is not authentic. So that's an easy thing to slip into. Instant access, people expect immediate response, they expect immediate delivery or results, and that can be really hard to break. Hello, welcome. Also, social media can be really impersonal, and it can feel like you're speaking to a wall. Like right now I'm staring into a small hole and imagining that the people who are watching and others are looking back at me. Hello. And by pretending to do that and imagining you, it helps me to create a more personal connection. But it can be really hard to do that if you're not used to it. I mean, I've practiced for probably hundreds of hours before doing these live videos, and I've gotten used to the method of doing it. But if you're used to speaking to people in front of you, then it can be a hard transition. Also, social media makes it hard to reflect and to do a post-mortem evaluation because it's so driven. The whole method is to keep pushing content and to keep moving forward and to have new information all the time. Sometimes we get lulled into a sense of now, future movement, and not reflect on what happened in the past. I think that's a big mistake. And it's not just social media, but it's also just a mindset about the world. So if you develop a company culture where you're investigating past experiences or failures in a way that you're curious, you have curiosity, and you're grateful for what happened, even if it wasn't what you expected, that can bring out a whole different perception of how your company is seen by others. The perception is actually really important. Okay, so not reflecting on the situation, and the next one is being reactive versus reflective. So that's kind of the same type of thing. If we react to things quickly because of the instantaneousness of social media, it can be damaging to our brand or to the culture that you're trying to create. If you reflect on it and you're able to take time to understand how people are perceiving you or what's happening internally with that behavior, that communication, the decisions that you're making, then it can make for a much more effective company culture. And finally, the drive to compete or beat out competitors at any cost can be very obvious on social media. I've seen so many business owners that follow very trendy and very successful and popular gurus who encourage just basically crushing the competition or stamping them out or pushing through barriers and going forward, and that's all very yang, forceful, aggressive thinking, and it can work. If that works for your company, that's awesome. Use that method. But there is a lot of power in receiving and being reflective. And maybe it's because I live on the West Coast now. Maybe it's because I've done a lot of internal work and calming down that tendency I have to push and force and act. But I have learned to be respectful of the pace of others and to take the time to reflect on what happened rather than trying to always move forward quickly. There is a lot to be said for taking the time to smell the flowers, so to speak. And I have literally taken the time to do that. I love looking at the bees in my backyard and just being in nature. It calms you down and it can help you to understand other realities of how your business is running just by reflecting on the pace of nature. Okay, so let's go on to question number. That was question 5. So question 6, can you share some tips on how to navigate a big leadership transition? Transition is one of the words that I got very interested in at the end of a master's program. My last class was in change management, and one of the books I was assigned, I actually recommend. The final question here is going to be, what books do you recommend? I'll just show you right now. It's this one right here. It's Managing Transitions by Dr. William Bridges. I already recommended his other book, How to Be the CEO of Your Life, or I forget the exact title, but it has to do with reassessing yourself as a professional and deciding whether to go into business for yourself, or how you can present yourself as a business owner and thinking process of that, rather than being an employee who's stuck in a rut of producing for others. It's a really interesting book. But this is one of his other books. He actually published this, I believe, starting in the 70s, and he's since passed away, but just a brilliant, brilliant gentleman. He grappled with a lot of personal tragedies. His first wife was diagnosed with cancer, and he wrote an amazing book that described his journey of coming to terms with that grief. So, great book. Tips on how to navigate that transition and to keep in mind the culture you're trying to create. The first thing is to frame the situation. So what is happening in the transition? If maybe you have a leadership change, or you've lost a key employee, or you have a financial crisis, or you lost a key account, or you just have a personal issue that's affecting your ability to be a strong leader. All of those can impact the culture, because it will feed into how your behavior is and how everyone else behaves toward you. So frame the situation. What is happening right now? What are the boundaries of that? Look back at what happened, so both good and bad, and this is what a postmortem would be. You look back and you state logically what happened in the past to lead up to this, and then you look ahead, you imagine a future, what you would like to see. And then that in-between phase is what Dr. Bridges talks about. It's an unknown zone. It's an uncertainty. So in that in-between stage, it's really important to invite input from others, especially if they're experiencing the transition with you. So if your staff are going through this transition where they're wondering what the future of the company is going to be, their feelings and experiences are valid, and encouraging them to give you feedback and to share their grief or pain or suffering in that process is healing, and it's also really beneficial to you making additional adjustments for the benefit of the company. So I also recommend wisely using your resources, your processes, and your budget during a transition period. It's really tempting to latch on to instant solutions or new software programs, or somebody who can come in and fix everything, but that's not really going to solve all of the problems. There's a lot that will not work, and the path to getting to where you're trying to go, if you're transitioning in an unknown situation, can be really confusing. Also, something I've read in this book and several others is the benefit of grieving loss. And it sounds really strange to say when we're talking about company culture, but a culture is a reflection of your beliefs and your what you expect as a business owner. When you go through a transition, it affects everyone differently, but it can feel like something's being ripped out. So not allowing the grief process to fully set in, and not giving people the time to be sad or to say goodbye, is not fair to them, and it can be very damaging psychologically. Trying to gloss over that process, even in a business setting, because people put a lot of their effort and time, and they invest a lot of themselves in a company. If they work there or if they own it, you're investing yourself. So when something changes and takes away something important, it's really important to recognize the change that's happened and what is now missing, what has been taken away, and allow yourself time, allow your staff time to grieve that loss. I think that's one of the most important things I've learned from this book, that grief is normal and grief is healthy, and if you allow time for that, it actually makes healing happen more quickly and more thoroughly. And finally, once you get to the new point where you have a new situation and you overcome all these difficult struggles together, be sure to celebrate that, because you have overcome something difficult. So you've been able to grieve the loss of the old, and now you can celebrate the new. So all this can tie into your company culture, because it's a reflection of what you've experienced and what your company's doing. All right, have a few more questions here, so I'll just try to get through them pretty quickly. We had a month with really high turnover, somebody shared with me. really high turnover, meaning a lot of staff left. How do I keep my remaining employees engaged? Engagement is creating, nurturing, and managing relationships with stakeholders who are individuals who contribute or benefit from your business or your organization. Your purpose in having engagement is to meet their needs, fears, and expectations. And in order to have strong relationships that have a good engagement or bond, you need to nurture that by creating an environment that meets their needs and also that allows them to communicate with you. So you can see how culture really does interact with engagement. You can ask yourself, are your stakeholder relationships healthy? I mean, if you're honest, maybe you don't have the greatest relationship with some of your staff, or maybe you've had some disagreements that have created tension. That could be leading to turnover. What are the root causes? What brought you to this point? And that takes a lot of self-reflection as a leader. I have so much empathy on leaders who are able to dig deep into the reasons why they may have contributed to the problems in their organization. Most of the time, a business owner has a lot to do with the problems that result in an organization, and it is so painful and hard to realize that and to come to terms with it. But ultimately, business owner is responsible for everything. And then when you take on that mantle of responsibility, you're able to make a lot of headway, because then you have the ability to take control back. If you blame others, or you put the reasons for failure on other people, it doesn't give you the sense of control that you will need to solve the problem. So then, take responsibility and then commit to change. You have to commit to making different choices, to creating maybe different behavior or expectations. So communicating empathetically and clearly with your staff about why people have left. That can be very difficult, but it's important to grieve the loss of key stakeholders, key people, key staff or customers, and then apologizing for your actions that have led to that as an owner or as a leader. It's really humbling to do that, but it's so important. And then allowing for feedback without retaliation. So if you hear things that are not pleasant and you punish people or discipline them for that, that completely kills any engagement that you have left, because nobody will want to share anything. And then reframing it using a structured mechanism. So I'm basically going through the healthy feedback loop methods. You would reframe it using a collection method to get feedback, and then be able to analyze it through a framework of how does this match your vision for the future. And then the fifth step would be to have visible follow through. As I mentioned, one of the bad examples of company culture was a company that made all these great promises and had this exciting experience of coming up with opportunities for improvement, and then there was absolutely nothing done with it. And there was no explanation, we just moved on and we kept having the same problems. So visible follow through and implementation of those changes and monitoring the progress and making corrections is really important if you are looking for engagement to go up. People need to hear that you're going to keep your promise, and they also need to hear that you're making adjustments, because if things don't change, it's kind of the definition of insanity, right? Trying to do the same things and expecting different results is not very encouraging to the staff who were still there. Okay, so that was engagement. All right, another question someone sent me: what do you consider the most important aspects of a successful business culture? A few things, and then we're going to wrap this up. So, clearly defined. Your culture needs to be defined. People need to know what it is. It may be subconscious, and you may never have defined it, and that may be okay, but it helps to write this down and be really crystal clear on what you expect and how you expect it, and what behavior is something you encourage and what behavior is not. It should be comfortable. It should be reassuring and familiar to people who want to contribute to your goals, who want your business to succeed. Your company culture also should be integrated, so it should connect with your objectives and your performance measures. And if it's not, then it might be very uncomfortable for someone to work in your company if they don't know how the actions that are appropriate connect with the ultimate goals. It can create a lot of tension internally. I've been in several organizations where that was the case. Spoken expectations are one thing, and then subconscious, under the surface, unspoken expectations are totally different. So how do we know how to act? What are we supposed to do in a situation that we have a question? Do we go with what was spoken or what is strongly encouraged beneath the surface? It can be really, really hard to know. Also, make ethical choices. Create a culture that reflects your ethical beliefs and stick with them. Make a line in the sand and refuse to go over that line. You'll have a lot of respect from people if you do that. And finally, flexible. Your culture should be responsive to changes that are happening in your culture, in your employees, in your belief system, because our beliefs can change. It should adapt as the needs of your company change, as your customers evolve. You may shift your focus of your business, so you need to be flexible in the way that you're expecting behavior to happen. Okay, so we're almost done here. The last question has to do with what books I would recommend that have to do with company culture. So I mentioned that Managing Transitions by William Bridges is my absolute favorite. I think that he answers probably every question that has been asked of me. I referred back to his work quite a lot. Another book that I would recommend is called The E-Myth Revisited. It's an excellent resource that really makes you think about how your business runs and what the important things are in life, by Michael Gerber. He weaves a really great story, and he's a great storyteller. So throughout the book, he tells a story of a business owner who has lost her passion for what she does, and she's confused about how to make it work. And he brings this story back to a place where she reflects on what's most important and what drives her. And the story is just incredible, where she comes from and why that's so meaningful, and the emotion attached to it becomes her new business culture. So I recommend this one as a way to get an example of how to tell a story about your culture. And finally, this one may be a little bit surprising to you, maybe. The Smartest Guys in the Room, The Amazing Rise and Scandalous Fall of Enron. I've been interested in Enron for a while. It was a company that completely tanked disastrously in the early 2000s. I had just finished college, and I remember the announcement in some newspapers where the owners of the business where I was working made some comments about how basically this is the beginning of the end for a lot of other companies. Like, the house of cards is starting to fall. And I was 21 years old. I had no idea what they were talking about. And in the years since then, I've done a lot of research on what happened to Enron and why they presented a culture that was so strong and fearless and forceful, and it was basically the Titanic. They presented a culture of strength and power, and they didn't believe they would ever fail, but under the surface there was so much going on that was completely the opposite of that. They made a lot of unethical decisions, they broke a lot of rules, they thumbed their nose at people in charge, and they took advantage of vulnerable people, which is something that I'm very passionate about. I think that they were sucked into a world that they couldn't control, and they believed that they were doing the right thing in their minds. But in the end, it hurt thousands of people. It took away life savings, and there's a lot in this book that describes the culture of how that happened. So that's why I recommend reading it, to find out more about culture. So if you have other questions about company culture, how to create it, or whether you're doing the right thing, I would love to hear your questions. I provide a free initial consult to any business owner who would like help figuring this out, and there's absolutely no cost for that. And I also provide a lot of other resources on my website, laconticonsulting.com. So thank you so much for tuning in. I will have another event like this next week at 10:30 Pacific Standard Time. And again, I'd love to hear your comments on this. Please let me know what you think, and ask other questions so that I can answer them in the future.